Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into one of the most complex and honestly kind of paradoxical events of the 20th century, the Iranian Revolution of 1979. We're going to unpack exactly how a nation went from a monarchy to a theocracy, and the immense historical weight behind how it all went down. Let's start with a massive historical paradox. A modernizing state actually creating its own destroyers. A nation can be rapidly building its future, building all these intricate systems, and still be incredibly volatile underneath it all. The Iranian state was engineering unprecedented progress, but at the exact same time, it was inadvertently engineering its own total collapse. And that leads us to the huge central mystery we are unpacking today. How exactly does a pro-Western secular monarchy just flip into an Islamic theocracy virtually overnight? It's one of the rare times in recorded history where a highly sophisticated, modernizing government was completely replaced by a state based entirely on religious authority. We're going to trace the exact fateful steps that caused this massive shift. Section 1, the White Revolution's price. Okay, so to really understand this collapse, we've got to look at the catalyst. The Shah of Iran was forcing rapid progress through this really ambitious program he called the White Revolution. And this was a massive societal overhaul. We're talking redistributing land to modernize the economy, granting women the right to vote, and pouring an absolute ton of money into building a massive military. He was basically trying to force Iran into the modern era at breakneck speed, and it created immense urban wealth in the process. But, and this is a huge but, all this progress came with a massive blind spot. Because while the urban elite were prospering immensely from this white revolution, traditional religious leaders, known as the ulema, along with the rural poor, felt completely alienated. They were literally left in the dust by this new aggressively westernized vision of the country. Basically, society was fracturing right down the middle into two entirely different realities. And this alienation, it was intensely magnified by a really widespread sentiment at the time that the Shah was just a puppet of the United States. This resentment went all the way back to a 1953 CIA-backed coup that reinstated his power. Plus, to keep control, the Shah relied heavily on his secret police, SAVAK. They used brutal torture and extreme surveillance to maintain order. So as you can imagine, this created a highly combustible pressure cooker of anger across the whole nation. Section 2. Tapes versus the throne. As this pressure cooker finally reached its boiling point, two completely opposing figures emerged, basically battling for the very soul of the nation. On one side, you have the Shah, representing secularism, deep Western alliances, and rapid industrialization. And right against him is Ayatollah Khomeini, an exiled cleric standing for religious authority, strict traditionalism, and a fierce, uncompromising rejection of the Shah's vision. It's this classic clash: industrial, secular power facing off against deeply rooted religious authority. Now, here is where Khomeini executed some absolute tactical genius using cassettes tapes. Seriously, while living in exile in France, he smuggled his sermons back into Iran on these simple, easily reproduced tapes. It was basically the low-tech social media of 1979. He leveraged this totally grassroots analog network to completely bypass the Shah's intense censorship. It was a brilliant, unstoppable way to mobilize people that the Shah's sophisticated security forces just could not track or contain. Section 3. The Cycle of Grief. So how did this actually play out on the ground? Well, it created this almost mathematical escalation of tragedy on the streets. Think about it like this. Step 1, protests erupt against the Shah. Step 2, the army violently cracks down, killing protesters. Now, here's where religious tradition literally changes history. Step 3, Islamic tradition dictates a mandatory 40-day mourning period for the dead, which leads to Step 4, when people gathered on that 40th day to mourn, that gathering organically turned into a massive new protest, which, tragically, led to more killings, triggering another 40-day mourning period, exploding into even larger, more furious demonstrations. It was this perpetual, unstoppable engine of revolution. And because of that cycle, the timeline of the final collapse was breathtakingly fast. It climaxed with the devastating Black Friday massacre in September 1978, where the Shah's troops fired into a massive crowd in Tehran, killing hundreds. This was absolutely the point of no return. By January 16, 1979, the Shah was forced to flee Iran, allegedly for a vacation. Yeah, a vacation from which he would never return. Just 2 weeks later, Ayatollah Khomeini returned to Tehran, and he was greeted by a triumphant crowd of literally millions. Section 4. Birth of the Republic. Now, with the monarchy officially gone, the initial revolutionary coalition, which was this broad mix of liberals, communists, and religious conservatives, quickly fractured. What followed was the purge. You see, the revolution wasn't completely Islamic on day one, but Khomeini's conservative faction wasted absolutely no time. They systematically eliminated their former liberal and communist political allies to construct an entirely new constitution. Under this new system, Iran became an Islamic republic, where a supreme leader held ultimate, absolute, and entirely unchecked power over both the elected president and the parliament. And the geopolitical gravity, not to mention the human cost, of this new regime solidified into a single devastating number: 444. In November 1979, Iranian students stormed the U.S. Embassy in Tehran and took 52 Americans hostage. They held them for an agonizing 444 days. This crisis didn't just make headlines, it completely severed U.S.-Iran relations, creating a massive geopolitical rift that has lasted for decades. Section 5. The 2026 Legacy. Okay, so why does all of this matter today? Well, nearly 50 years later, the shockwaves of 1979 are still violently shaping our present reality, and they're operating on two distinct fronts. Geopolitically, the revolution's original intent to export its Islamic model directly fueled the ongoing Cold War between Saudi Arabia and Iran. That mistrust, born in 1979, it deeply fuels today's nuclear standoffs and the regional axis of resistance. But internally, it's a completely different story. The government faces massive, recurring pushback from Generation Z. These are highly educated, globally connected youths driving movements like the Women Life Freedom protests. And they are incredibly weary of the heavy religious restrictions imposed all the way back in 1979. And honestly, it is a stunning historical echo. Think about it. The youth of 2026 are pushing back against 1979 religious restrictions, perfectly mirroring the way the youth of 1978 pushed back against the Shah's secular authoritarianism. The current generation is literally out in the streets fighting the very system their grandparents fought so incredibly hard to install. It's wild to think about. Which leaves us to ponder this final, really profound historical irony. As the quote goes, the Shah's rapid modernization created the very middle class and student population that eventually had the education and organizational skills to overthrow him. And that begs a massive question for us to end on. If the Shah's modernization bred the educated class that destroyed his regime, will today's Islamic Republic eventually fall to the very generation of educated, globally connected youth that it raised? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I really hope it helps you see this piece of history just a little bit clearer. Catch you next time.